The Tucker Carlson Today show is a rare, popular, conservative format for discussing the culture wars that were unleashed in 2020 and beyond. Carlson and his guests noted that the norms of American society had seemingly been changed suddenly overnight. These changes included the following. Rioting was accepted as long as it was for Black Lives Matter. Equity of outcomes suddenly trumped equality of opportunity. Diversity, equity, inclusion mandates were forced on employees and students. Vaccines, masks, and lockdowns were forced on people who didn't need them. Censorship and overt liberal bias in the mainstream media was suddenly okay. Speech was free as long as it was anti-Trump or supported woke dogma. And if you dared to question the dogma, cancel culture was a weapon that could get you fired. Carlson asked many of his guests the same three questions. Question number one was, why did all of these things get unleashed in 2020? Question number two was, how should we respond to these attacks? And question number three was, how is all this going to end for the country? In this video, I cover only question number two. In 2020, many Americans were caught off guard by the abruptness of the changes. Knowing how to live a life is difficult enough without an owner's manual, and the suddenness of these and the severity of these changes made things more confusing. So when we fight back, how should we do that? Where? Who? When? How exactly do we know how to start? Do you react defensively with patience and reason? Or do you react offensively with the maximum speed and power? This video shows the answers from 19 of Carlson's guests on the show. Stay tuned to the end, and I'll give you my answer.
How do you, and I'm not even going to use the word conservative because increasingly I'm not quite sure what that means, but people who want to live in a healthy society, a vibrant society, a thriving society that reproduces itself, for example, how do they respond to a moment like this? You've been, I think, almost uniquely effective in exposing and then fighting against things that you think are wrong and immoral. But how should others go about that?
I think there are really two things that you need to do. First is secure your own personal and kind of familial autonomy. So find a place, a culture, a town, a city, a place that reflects your values. Escape from these places where these institutions are dominating. Because ultimately it's your kids, and you have to protect your kids. And I think proximity and culture and local society is really important.
For the average sort of normal person who liked this country 30 years ago and would kind of like to live in it again, what do you do to make it the country that you want it to be?
I don't think there's any value in martyrdom. In getting fired from your job because, you lashed out at the garbage mandatory diversity training. That being said, I think it's important for people to be somewhat defiant and to refuse to reaffirm the lies that were fed constantly. Probably my favorite line in politics comes from Pat Buchanan's memoirs. Courage is contagious. They just need some nudges to be reminded that they're not crazy and that there are other people out there who believe this.
And I hope that more and more Americans just step away from that, opt out of it, and call it out.
How do you do that?
Everyone can do it in their own lives. My experience is that people shouldn't expect the cavalry to come to save them. I think the discovery of middle age, apart from anything else, is that the cavalry is you.
So in practical terms, that would mean if you have children in a school whose curriculum has changed dramatically since the death of George Floyd, and you find your kids being subjected to this, you stand up and say no.
Yes, and also have confidence, intellectual confidence, moral confidence, to say no. We knew until yesterday this wasn't the case. The death of George Floyd doesn't demand a rewrite of American history, but you need not to be bullied. You need not to be bullied by people who pretend to know more, and who almost never do.
I'll recommend Chantal Delsol. It's a French woman, philosopher, in a book called Icarus Fallen. This guy who thought he was going to fly up to the sun, now he has to get up the next day and like go find a job and figure out how to live a life with meaning, knowing that those crazy utopian dreams that he had were just that. They were just dreams. And she likens that to our society after we went through the 20th century. We tried all these utopian dreams and they all ended in horror. And now we have to figure out how to move forward.
How should people live in America right now?
Well, the first thing I would say is, and I've touched on this already, is don't be nostalgic. That is, you have to understand that the future is going to be different than the past, and there's no future in which it's going to be like it was even in living memory. But beyond that, the key thing, I think, is to develop useful, resilient skills as a young person in particular. My older daughter wants to teach little kids. So that's probably, they currently attend a classical Christian school. She wants to teach at a classical Christian school. That path is fairly straightforward. She can go get a classical education at college, hopefully find a non-beta man to marry, have some kids.
Where's she going to find that guy, by the way? Do you know?
That's a problem. Church, Hillsdale, a couple other colleges, but that's a huge problem.
It's the problem. Do you think it's salvageable, the system that you participated in?
No.
Really?
Yes and no. A case for revolution, not a case for reform. So we've been trying reform for, like I said, for how many decades now? And what's the point of going to these accrediting schools if you must bend the knee to these woke ideologies? What's the point of giving more legitimacy and more money to this leviathan of bad ideas? And our argument is, no, boycott the damn thing, right? Boycott it, cut its funding, starve the beast.
If you had college-age children, what would you say to them?
I would say, unless there's this absolute burning in your heart to go into the life of mind, I would say go into the trades instead. Yeah, go into the trades, stay local, marry young, start a family.
I would burn the place down after I was fired. It would be so fun. So every time, and occasionally conservatives somewhat apologize. Every apology takes us closer to the abyss. Never apologize.
Not for telling the truth.
Nope.
And I think what I've discovered is that how close we are in America to losing it all.
Yeah.
And how there's not another country. I've been to 70-something countries. I haven't been everywhere, but I've been a lot of places. Nobody's going to pick up the baton for religious freedom, for the gospel. There's no place right now in position. And so I think for me, having 4 kids living in America, it really was revealing, we have to fight. If the church in America is willing to fold, for a virus with the 99.98% survivable rate, I believe that was just the first test.
When we have all of this evidence that they're liars. So I think our calling right now as a country is that we need to be radically transparent about the people who hold power. And we need to go after them constantly. We need to be filing public records requests. We need to be reminding people of things like this, because that's the way we fix this country, is to get rid of the people who, through the Orwellian machinations of the press, are constantly giving a clean bill of health. And then, meanwhile, normal, good people are frequently destroyed and never have redemption.
I think really, if we want to stop this, we have to figure out how to back each other up.
So if you all of a sudden find yourself as a person or a member of a collection of people, a movement that has functionally no power, what do you do about it?
A piece to just posted today that explains this, or at least it explains his.
What's the article called? What's the name of it?
It's called The Art of Spiritual Warfare.
The Art of Spiritual Warfare.
At theamericanmind.org. Be indirect about it. You don't go after, you don't try to strip Harvard of its endowment tomorrow because you're just going to lose. I mean, that's charging a machine gun nest, that kind of thing. You don't go after the fortresses of the enemy. You have to have a positive vision too.
So let's say you've got a little bit of dough you'd like to invest, but you have sincere beliefs and values, and you don't want your investments to undermine those beliefs and values? Like, let's say you really care about your family and you want your kids to grow up in the country that you did. Where do you invest your money?
That's a good question. There are a handful of funds that have been developed over the past couple of years that are attempting to push back at this, against this. There are a handful of retail wealth advisors that are attempting to put together portfolios to push back against this. And there are a handful of very small asset managers who are doing the same.
So what do we do? Yeah, so I think the right place to focus first is on the relationship between these companies and government itself, right? So that basic principle that the government cannot use companies to do indirectly what the government can't do directly.
So our idea is, why don't you have a venture capital firm that's going to finance these newer businesses, right, that are not already established, that are going to come up and be the economy of tomorrow with a venture capital firm ourselves. And so we're going to have our own money to invest in companies that are aligned with the types of values that I think most Americans are, which is to effectively implement a form of patriotic capitalism, as well as an emphasis on shareholder primacy.
What will it be called?
1789 Capital, which, is the year of the Bill of Rights.
The path to redeeming, saving, protecting the country from what we're seeing now.
Right.
What do we do now?
I think that there's actually a lot of potential with women. They've been made very unhappy.
Yeah.
And it's really dark to see how some of these lives turn out. And there's great room for older women who have lived out the lies that have been given to them, that you don't need to have children. You can live, a life of moving from place to place, a life of amusements, and that will be fulfilling. They can warn young women about this.
Given that basket of facts, how do you rebuild?
You know the joke about how you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Starting with the definition of what I thought a better, more vital country would look like, I then realized pretty quickly that there isn't a silver bullet. Like, there's not and I'm, full disclosure for anybody thinking about buying the book, there's not a chapter that says, we can solve the country with this one weird trick.
I think what it means for those of us that don't want to go down that road is it requires that we have a really positive alternative to it.
Yes.
One that I think it starts with a love of human nature, a love of human beings.
Yes.
And that means that you then have to love human civilization because it protects humans, not just the strong, but it protects all humans. And then you get to other consequences: abundant and cheap energy, just law, law and order that's just and right, and equal justice under the law, and meritocracy, a system that helps us to get the best out of people into their best professions. We want, we don't want people that are building our bridges to be selected for some genetic characteristic. We want them selected for who's best at building bridges. So I think we got to reaffirm civilization.
This last stage of mass formation can be prevented if the small group who doesn't go along with the mass formation makes the right choice. It has to make the right choice. And then this choice has everything to do with whether it will choose to speak out or whether it will remain silent.
And so what we have to do is we have to mobilize that silent majority and say to them, just agreeing with us isn't enough. You've actually got to get up off your backside and make some kind of contribution. And whether that is standing for a school board, which you'd never thought in your life of doing, but you'd allowed the activist left-wing parents to do.
But there's a second thing that we have to do. We have to shift this kind of idiotic idea that had spread among conservatives that we have to change the culture in order to change the country. It's such a backwards way of looking at it. We actually have to use the political power at our disposal in state legislatures and in the federal legislature to change public policy and change law. We live in a republic, and conservatives, for some reason, have ceded territory for a number of reasons, a kind of libertarian instinct to say, well, using the state or changing the laws or enforcing norms through public policy is the wrong thing to do. We should have a kind of libertarian system where anyone does anything. The problem is that you're then ceding all of the power centers and all of the centers of culture, law, and institution to your enemies, to people who are going to use them for, I think, evil aims. And so conservatives need to wake up and say, well, where do we have levers that we can pull? We have democratic majorities. We have legislative power in most states, including supermajorities in many states, because these families that don't have the power or wealth or sophistication to resist this imposition of elite ideology on their families, we're going to fight on behalf of them.
Watching those clips, you can see they ranged in intensity, from playing defense and being slightly defiant to playing offense with a more hard war strategy. The strongest of these suggestions included the following, such as never apologize if you're right, never bow to the mob, call out the liars, run for public office and be the ones who actually run the government, and pull all the levers of government possible to pass legislation that protects families and children. One of the things that struck me was that even among the more hard war strategy answers, everybody seemed to be showing restraint. Nobody talked about secession from the Union or used the word civil war. My personal answer is based on my knowledge of human nature and my long career working as a psychiatrist and a researcher. The type of ideological thinking that we're talking about rarely changes voluntarily. The basic moral foundations of people can't change even if they want to change them. An example of this would be, say, the idea of boycotting universities. That would be a voluntary activity that I don't think would work and would probably make things worse. Instead, I think it's better to try to take some control of universities that is within government's authority and force them to honor the constitutional right of free speech. Therefore, my thinking is more in line with the Chris Rufo-style strategy of hard war with a more muscular government. In line with this strategy, Florida passed a law in 2023 that prohibits higher education from using public funding to support initiatives of social activism for things like DEI initiatives.
Some of these niche subjects like critical race theory, other types of DEI-infused courses and majors, Florida's getting out of that game. If you want to do things like gender ideology, go to Berkeley, go to some of these other places. That's fine.
Now that radical progressive liberals have demonstrated that they are quite willing to try to reimagine and deconstruct the American project, we can't be naive enough to think that reasoning or voluntary activities are going to be an effective defense.
Expect action. Expect follow through. We are going to work to get it done, and we're not just going to tell you what you want to hear one day, get into office, and then totally forget that we ever committed to do that. And so as president, I pledge to be an energetic executive. We will be on offense, and we will take on the big issues head on.
We are all in a culture war, whether you know it or not, and the only thing that ends wars is offensive action. Lastly, how each of us responds in ways that impacts us as adults is one thing. But if you have families, I think you more readily understand that the most important reason for responding is for protecting children.
There's bad stuff that's getting into the schools. There's pornography that's getting into the schools. So the parents have had to blow the whistle in Florida. They've had to, yeah, well, thank you. We're not going to let you impose an agenda on our kids. We're going to stand up for our kids. We're going to make sure to do it right. That's what we're going to do.